Well, thank you very much to the Life Sciences Society. I've never been to one of these events, although I know that I've got many very good colleagues who have been keen supporters, not least with my colleague who is the director of the School of Public Health, Keiji Fukuda at Hong Kong U, previously at the WHO. So I'm very, very pleased to be able to come and thank you, Vincent, for really doing a huge service for Hong Kong. Now, originally, it would have been a very relaxing evening with a very good friend of mine sharing the same stage. But I am anxious tonight. I'm anxious for two reasons. But first and foremost, I'm speaking after Sandro. He is such a tour de force that if you actually go on his personal webpage, you would have thought this looks like the diary and the itinerary of the US president. Not the present one, but all the previous ones. Shouldn't wish to mention the same, in the same sentence, the two people. So that's one main reason, in fact, the main reason why I'm very anxious. And if I faint because I go into atrial fibrillation, please rescue me. The second reason is because I've literally been running all over town today, and I was so late that I didn't get a chance to meet many of you before the dinner, for which I apologize. I've been running around because I've been trying to help government deal with the Wuhan outbreak. And I have a research team who are still working back in the office on trying to model the epidemiological preparedness for the Wuhan outbreak. Every night at around this time, KG and I would get phone calls from Geneva and Toronto. Yesterday I got a phone call, and folks from all over the world asking us, do you know what's going on? So that's the first unfinished epidemic of infectious diseases that takes up a lot of my energy, and currently it's taking up all of my energy. But tonight I'm not going to be talking about that epidemic. I'm going to be talking about the mental health epidemic. So we face in cities usually at least 3 types of epidemics. The infectious disease types, and we happen to live in the epicenter of flu, the epicenter of coronaviruses in the world. Even in just my 20 years in Hong Kong, I've had the distinct pleasure of crossing paths with KG and others. For 97, that's when KG was featured on the cover of the Sunday New York Times magazine, wearing the full gear of an infectious disease person. 2003, SARS. 2009, flu when I was in government, and when you all got very sick of me because every afternoon at 4:30 you'll see my face on television. 2013, H7 and 9, when Hong Kong thankfully never had a case, but we were very much working with the mainland authorities. And then now, 2019, 2020. 2019, 2020, we have this. Let's go back one. Whoops, does it go back? It doesn't seem to want to go back. There we go. So I'm going to be talking about something that is embargoed until tomorrow morning, because it's coming out in The Lancet tomorrow morning. So please don't tweet about it until 7:30 tomorrow morning, otherwise I'm going to be beheaded. And I think that there are a couple of members of the press here, I'm sure that you will understand. Now, actually this thing doesn't work. Yes, thank you. So this is actually a follow-up piece of work from the time of Occupy Central, or the umbrella movement, depending on what political persuasion you happen to belong to. So this actually, during Occupy Central, we actually looked at much the same things, that is the mental health burden to do with socio-political events. And then subsequently, we reviewed the whole field of mental health during and after protests, riots, and revolutions. And this is coming out next week, I think. So what I'm describing to you is really inspired by Sandro's work. Population mental health, particularly in cities, is actually his field of expertise. So we have benefited hugely from our exchanges and his help over the years. This is what I'm going to be talking about, depression and PTSD during major social unrest in Hong Kong. And we were very lucky to have been funded by the Jockey Club Charities Trust to start the family cohort. Family actually is an acronym. It actually spells find a moment to say I love you. That's actually why it's called the family cohort. The other reason why it's called the family cohort is because unlike most of the cohort studies around, we don't sample individuals. We actually sample households. And we actually even go and extend into multi-household families. So first degree households. So that's the sampling unit, and that is the reason why it's called a family household cohort study. And if, for those of you who are locals, you will remember that at around the time of 2006, 2007, there had been a sort of slate or a mini epidemic of suicide homicides in the same family. And therefore, during that time, the Jockey Club Charities Trust thought that they should do something about it. They didn't quite know what exactly they should do, but they thought they should do something about it, and they came to us at the School of Public Health, and so we said to them, we need to actually study what is wrong, if you think there is something wrong, and then we need to then design programs, so action research, and then implement them, but evaluate them at the same time. And so we started this multi-component family study, and I still remember distinctly in actually thinking and conceptualizing how we would do something like this. The current Minister of Health, Sophia Chan, and I actually flew to Boston. And we talked to quite a few people there and learned how we might start to construct such a cohort. And the cohort actually started in 2009, and that's why this is a 10-year prospective study. So, are you going to give me a different clicker? That works? Thank you. By the way, he's Michael Nee. He's actually the guy who did all the slides. He's the first author on the paper. This is him. The last one is me. He's actually not the clicker passer. He's actually one of our assistant associate professors at the school. So what we did was, in 2009, we had a household visit, just like how they do it for population census. Then we had a second wave, and we did a second household study, and we measured everything under the sun. Okay, physical health and anthropometrics. We did basically all the things that you would expect us to do, and some. And then throughout, we then took a subsample of, and this original sample size was 1% of all households in Hong Kong, huge. And the Jockey Club actually gave us, this actually cost us, the first two waves, 125 million to put together. And then subsequently, we took bits and pieces of it, and we followed by telephone. The same people with replenishment throughout Occupy Central umbrella movement, after Occupy Central in the interim, and then the NT extradition, those social unrest. And the latest wave was up until the end of November. And we are now planning for yet another wave. So that's how this came about, and that's the reason why those of you who are philanthropists and supporters of science, you should fund cohort studies and keep them going. This is just a timeline of what happened. So April 3rd was when this whole thing started, with the bill being introduced in first reading in LegCo, and then the rest for all the locals who actually lived through these events. Interestingly, just let me point out, because I don't think anybody will actually read the 12-page paper tomorrow, but there has been a lot of debate about how many people actually marched. You know, the 1 million person march, the 2 million person march, and so on and so forth. And there's been a lot of debate depending on who you actually talk to and how you actually do the sampling and what political persuasion you might be. So there is a tidbit of information in the paper which actually gave a completely independent estimate and not counting, not sending people out in the field and actually counting and using any of the methodologies that people have always used to count. But actually asking a population representative cohort that's been established way before this, and it's unbiased because they would have no reason and they couldn't even lie if they wanted to. For the so-called 1 million person march, we estimated with completely independent triangulated methodology, 0.9 million, pretty close. For the 2 million march, it was 1.2 million. So that was overinflated, but not by much. So that's really the extent. And it also, again, shows you the serendipitous findings that science gives you. Because without this, from 10 years ago and $125 million, you would actually never get an estimate that is completely from the left field that might validate or invalidate some of the politically tinged reports. This is social unrest in numbers. Direct causes of death will never come in the next 18 months, which is usually how vital statistics lag. But at least we know 2 that we can ascertain. Emergency room attendances, as of the beginning of December, at least 2,600 or so. Police injuries, about 500. Live rounds, 19. And then thousands or tens of thousands of petrol bombs, tear gas rounds, rubber bullets, and so on. And then arrests, about 6,000 and counting. And quite importantly, 15% in teenagers. And in people under the age of 30, that's basically 80%. So how did we assess mental health? We used validated measures, and we measured depressive symptoms, probable depression, and potential suicidal ideation. And these have been validated overseas and then adapted, contextualized, and revalidated for the local population. So here is the evolution of mental health or mental health burden before, during, and after major protests from 2009. Now, the darker the color, the more severe the depression severity. And as you can see, back in 2009, basically the light color, basically there's nothing. So very minimal, even if you think mild, moderate, severe. All right? And then, as you can see, this has just kept growing. And it did not significantly come back down after Occupy Central. And we're here. Very concerning. What you may have read from a press conference I gave in July was the penultimate bar, but this is as of the end of November. And if you actually then say, hey, how much of that actually translated into probable depression? What you would do in a study would be, you would take a very good screening, validated screening questionnaire, and then you would then sample from those who are labeled probable depressions, and you would do a diagnostic interview in sufficient numbers so that you would be confident that you would actually be measuring what you set out to measure. We are going to do that, but we obviously haven't got the time to do that yet. So if you just focus on the blue dot, it was about 2%, that's baseline, population baseline. Now it's 11 point something, 11.2, 5 times. PTSD, post-Occupy Central, and now that's 39%. Now, of course, PTSD is very difficult to ascertain, and in fact, you shouldn't actually measure it until the whole thing is over. But we kept on waiting for this thing to be over, and it's still not over. So we kind of don't know when to stop. The reason is because if you actually measure PTSD, you would have to take away that acute stimulus, and then see how much of it is just acute abreaction, how much of it is actually persistent. That basically shows you where our survey participants, the black dots, live, and where the probable depressions are, and you can see that they completely overlap. There is no district that is spared. What actually, or how might you actually go about identifying people who might be at risk of probable depression? It doesn't really matter what this is. This is basically just sociodemographics. If you actually look, anything that crosses this dotted line in the middle on multivariable adjustment doesn't show up. So what this tells you is it affects everybody. No group is spared. None. The only bar that you see that does not cross the middle is this one. And this is if you are on this for socio-political news for 2 hours or more per day, you are much more likely to be depressed, clinically depressed. And this is the only consistent protective factor, and that is you have a loving family. Family support, extremely important. Even medium level of family support is protected. Now, if you go to PTSD, it's much the same thing, except your family can't even save you. It's very powerful. Now, this is what really worries me. If you then actually say, well, how many people in Hong Kong, 7.3 million, is actually affected? How many people does it translate into? Those who have both probable depression and suspected PTSD is 2.5% of the population, which is about 160,000 people. Those who have probable depression alone is about 700,000 people, and those who may have PTSD, or at least an acute abreaction to the traumatic scenes, either experienced or perceived, is about 800,000 people. Which means that 1 in 5, 22% of that cohort actually reported probable major depression or suspected PTSD. That's 1 in 5. Now, then if you actually ask them, are you going to seek professional help, or do you need professional help? Fewer than half for either condition would tell you that no, we're not going to see anybody. Doctor, nurse, psychologist, social worker, no one. Which is quite concerning. And then if you actually say, well, if not, why not? Then you would see something quite interesting. That is, for the PTSD, which is the green, this thing sticks out like a sore thumb, privacy concerns. To the extent that there are so-called underground clinics giving care, acute care, usually, after major clashes. And if you go on Telegram, you will find generally 4 big groups that offer very organized but very, very private so-called underground care. And if you wish to or plan to seek healthcare or social care, in order, they want you to go and see a medical doctor, a clinical psychologist, social worker, counselors, nurses, and others. If you then put it all together, that's the burden. Remember that diagram. That's the burden. This is depression, this is PTSD. If you then screen out those who say they don't need anybody, if you screen out those who say even if they're going to see somebody, they're not going to see a doctor, and we only use medical doctor simply for illustration. I'm not at all suggesting that medical doctors is either required or desired to treat this. But for illustrative purposes, if you actually screen the non-medical doctors' preferences out, and then assume that even if you wanted and needed to see a medical doctor, 90% of it can be dealt with by primary care, and only 10% really needs a specialist psychiatrist. You would be adding 3% to the public sector queue. Similarly, you'll be adding 9% to the public sector queue because of PTSD. That's 12% of the public sector queue. Hong Kong doesn't have nearly as many psychiatrists, and by extension, clinical psychologists, social workers, counselors, as the rest of the OECD. As a comparison, the UK has twice the number of psychiatrists as we do. Now imagine that we've got half of the NHS's capacity, which has got very long waiting times anyway. Our waiting time, average, I'm not talking about the 90th percentile, average waiting time, public sector psychiatry clinics, first appointment, up to 64 weeks. 64 weeks, okay? That's a year and a half. If you add 12% to that annual caseload, these people are either going to recover, or you're going to end up having a lot more undesirable mental health sequelae, possibly suicide. I have two personal cases that I know of. One in our sister university, their director of development, actually committed suicide over the weekend. So when you actually do these kind of studies, these observational studies, you generally don't actually do direct care. But because of the special circumstances, for the people who said to us that they have bona fide suicidal ideation, we actually dealt with each of them. Each case, we actually had either a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist actually contact them and help them. And then refer them on to these places. So it took us a very, very long time to actually do these studies while being responsible because of the very special circumstances. So we actually delivered direct care, and we had to have a separate team to do it so as not to contaminate the science. Limitations, two very big limitations. The original cohort didn't have any kids, deliberately. But I showed you, 15% of the arrestees were under 18. What kind of mental health burden do you think teenagers might be subjected to? I don't know. In fact, we actually tried IRB. And you know what our IRB said? They said, you may go ahead and interview kids and recruit kids to be interviewed, but with parental consent. Do you know what our response rate was? 1%. We basically just dropped the idea. It's crazy. Okay, I didn't have time to fight with our IRB. But the scientific establishment needs to adapt. Secondly, we did not especially oversample members of the police force or law enforcement. Whatever you may think of them, can you imagine what the mental health burden that they bear and their family members? We calculated that in our sample, we would probably be including, given that it's a random sample, about 7 to 8 members of the police force out of the sample size of 1,500 or whatever it was. So clearly, it wouldn't actually show up. Probably depression and suspected PTSD might represent psychological distress in response to that acute stress event. But it may actually not be real psychopathology. So that's always a caveat. And we can't really draw a cause and effect relationship between what's been happening out on the streets for the last 7 months and the findings, but I can't, for the life of me, think of what might affect everybody in that kind of way. Take-home messages, you can read the paper tomorrow. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, just more broadly. Sandro ended his talk talking about life expectancy, showing you the different curves of proportion living in cities by calendar year or by calendar period, and then how long they would live. Now, of course, even in that paper, Hong Kong would show up way up in the top right-hand corner. That, by the way, I would commend to you as a very, very good Lancers Commission, spearheaded by a guy called Pang Gong, Gong Pang in Cantonese. He's actually a climate scientist, a quant, who spent 30 years of his life at Berkeley, and then in the last 5 years went back to Tsinghua. He's now the Dean of Science at Tsinghua. So he actually was the convener of that Lancet Commission. Really superb piece of work. It's called the Lancet Tsinghua Commission on Planetary Health. So I'm going to show you just Hong Kong data and then show you why Michael has decided to dedicate the rest of his career to studying population mental health. This is the trajectory of the ranking by economy or country since 1960, okay? So that's where Hong Kong's life expectancy, we shared the same life expectancy as the Soviet Union in 1960. Okay, so I'm going to just play it for you, and then US and UK. I'm just going to play it for you. Whoops. The Russians fell mostly because of alcohol. No, really, I'm serious. And we, of course, can you play it once again? 1960, look at Hong Kong and look at US and UK. Whoops. And in fact, both US and UK have had dips in the, you need to go down there and press play. Yes. In the recent 3 to 4 years, both the US and UK have shown dips in the life expectancy at birth. And we've been leading for the last 5 years. Okay? Cool. Superb. We are at the top right-hand corner of Sandro's last slide. But same kind of countries, scatter plot. This is how rich the countries are, and that's how satisfied with life they are. And there is a very nice sigmoid curve, except look at Hong Kong. We are way underperforming. Why? Why? And then the most shocking slide, I leave it for last. Whoops. Purpose in life, we're at the absolute bottom. This is real data. This is Gallup World Poll data. I was in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago. I scrutinized the data. So this is life in the most exciting city, a picture of which graces Sandro's book. But what does that tell us? And what kind of challenge that we all face collectively? And how do we get ourselves back standing up and standing proud and standing happy? With that, I thank you very, very much, and I look forward to the exchange we're about to have. Thank you.